Good evening. I've decided to do videos instead of terrible blog posts that no one cares about. Um, just because I think it will be slightly more useful than just me ranting about how hard the day was. For those who haven't tuned in before, I'm currently a student at CoderAcademy. We're, I don't know, maybe day 11 into it. It's the 14th. I guess it was like 4 weeks ago that we started. So yeah, I thought I will start doing more videos just to show what we've been learning and what I've been thinking about during the day. Cool. Today we did a whole bunch on stuff like re-looking at classes and looking at modules within Ruby. I think something, at least with this presentation slash video, that I wanted to demonstrate or put into people's minds was the concept of MVC. I think one of my educators mentioned it, and ever since then I've been kind of like trying to wrap my head around and be like, how does this work in like a terminal app kind of world? Seems like something like MVC, the model view controller method or like framework, works maybe a little bit more intuitively when you're talking about like web design, where you actually have like a front page, something that a user interacts with, and they don't get to interact with the back end as much. Though, maybe I'm just not really looking at it the right way. Anyway, so up on the main screen here, we've got just the terminal. So I created essentially what is like a database terminal. It's supposed to store employee details. It stores the name, the salary, and then also the position. And the idea was that I wanted to bitsy everything up so each file was only doing one thing, and also use a module because I'd not really used them before. So with this, you can create a database, which you'll have to if you want to add anyone, add employees to that database. You can switch database. You can like create more than one, switch to a new database, add employees to that, list them out, switch back to the other database, and then also destroy databases. It's not 100% complete, but I got it relatively functional and thought I would demonstrate it / talk about it a bit. So just to show how it works, so we can create a database. So ask for a name, I'm going to call it duck. And I have put a capital mark, so I'm not going to forget that. And then I can add an employee, so we'll put me in there. I'm a cleaner, and I make no money because I'm currently unemployed. I'm also going to add another employee. That person's name's going to be John, and that also is going to be a cleaner, and they're going to make a little more than me. So now I can list those people out. Great, that's both of us there. All right, so let's say that's like, I don't know, like it's a, what did I call it? Duck, the ducks database, like Jana database. So let's create another one. Let's see. And I'm going to call it admin. So maybe this will be like administrative stuff. We can add an employee. Sue, the, I don't know, principal, makes way more than us. So if I list this now, it'll only have Sue on there. So I've managed to like create two databases, and it's accessing a different one. If I want to switch back to the other one, I'll show the databases. I'll switch the databases. So it shows me what I've got, put in the one I want to get, what I want to switch to, back to duck, list the employees, and it's back to us payouts. Yeah, so I mean, it took way longer for me to do this than I thought it would, just because I was using, like, you can see on the side here, I've got 4 different classes, 1 module, and then an initialization simply to make this database interface, which is like way overkill. But I think it was interesting just to like figure out how things move around and like trying to implement that MVC-ness. So let's quit out of this and actually look at the code a little bit, if I can. Oh God, there we go. So we'll have a look at the init file because that's where it starts. And this is what I've tried to do. I tried to keep it as simple as possible. So it just says init. It just creates a new instance of the app, which is require relatively in the view. So if we go back to view, which is the next step down the chain, sweet. This is like what I was trying to do when I designed this was basically have it be the logic master of the front page. So I even wanted to keep the actual UI elements, user interface elements, outside of this class. All I wanted it to do was to like pull the UI elements that it needed to, and then sort of like act as logic. So, for example, while it's running, it's pulling the UI things that it needs from UI components, which is a module that I've got here that we'll look at next. Even I'm not sure about this. The UI components is actually helping with validation as well, because it's, you know, like I want to keep all of the writing, all of the like, you know, inputs and getsing outside of this actual like thing that you're interacting with, because it's just the logic, like it's just pushing the data. I guess that's what the controller is doing, but I don't know, like in my mind it made sense at the time. Like it is defining what you see. It doesn't, it's, yeah, like it pulls resources and shows them to you, you know, like that's its job. And then you put things into there and then it takes that and gives it to something else. So with that, it pulls something like a banner, shows you that thing, shows you the options from the module, and then it's getting inputs and then deciding on what it is. It's going to show you more stuff. And it's referencing the controllers here. But first we'll look at the UI. So if we go into the module, I'm not sure if a module is really the best choice, but we learned how to do that today, so I was going to use one. Create a new module called UI components, and this has more or less all of the writing in it that I want to show. It's the thing that puts things onto the screen, so to speak. So we've got our banner, options, it's got a validator in there as well, which will return things if valid. So create database, destroy database, add employee. So all of these different options, like this is where the like actual meat of what is shown to the person on the screen and how they interact with it is all in the UI module. So that comes back to the view, and then the view is actually what's running, whereas the UI is the resources that it's pulling. Cool. So yeah. That being said, it doesn't actually contain any data, these things. It's just sort of like showing you what it needs to show you, getting input when it needs to get to, and then it's sending all of that input back. So the UI sends it back to the view, which sends it back to the controller, which is the next thing I'm going to show you. So the controller, when I was creating this, basically the whole idea, you know, I was trying to go for this MVC model view controller, and I was trying to create something that sits between the actual stored data, which in this case is like the employees and the databases, and the view, which is pulling resources for the UI. So it's got a control, and then as you can see, like basically all of this is just functional stuff. Like there's no putsing, there's no getsing. It's just moving information where it needs to go and reassigning variables when it needs to happen. So like when you initialize, it creates its own database sort of array. You know, you create a database, it adds it to that array, and destroying it will like destroy what is ever the current database. You know, switching databases, adding employees. So this is like interacting specifically with the actual employee class, and the same with the roster right here. So it's sort of in charge, I guess, of deciding what happens to each of those things, which I think is probably different from the actual MVC model in terms of like it's not pulling information like the model itself. There's no like model in the background that's pulling information from like a bigger space. The control is sort of acting like it is, but it's not. So if you look at roster, you know, this is like a super simple class. It's just like creates a roster that you can store things in. Like that's it. You can store employees in it. And the employee class is just like defining that, storing all of the details in a hash so you can relatively easily get it back later. So yeah, I don't know, it was interesting like working through, you know, like displaying a UI, the UI, which is a module which is connected to this view, that comes back to the view, it goes back to the controller, and then maybe it goes a step further, and figuring out the syntax in order to actually make that happen. You know, this is like definitely way harder than it needs to be, and I think that maybe with a larger system it makes more sense, and maybe with like an actual web-based thing it would make a bunch more sense when you're working with different languages potentially. Here it seems like way too much work, but I don't know, I think it was interesting, a little interesting challenge to be like, I only want this layer to do this thing. Like the UI is only going to have the writing in it. the view is only going to be responsible for the not like responsible for what is happening in the front end, and then the controller is only going to be functional and it can only interact with the view and then these two back-end components. So yeah, I don't know, it was good learning, that's for sure. So I don't know, like, I would encourage anybody who's managed to get to like minute 10 of this video to have a read about MVC, see what you think about it. I think it's going to be definitely something that we hit on if you're a coder student as well. And then, I don't know, maybe just try and code something as simple as this, or more complicated, or even simpler, trying to use that model and seeing, okay, like how do I send data through different classes, like way back down the line, even if those classes are not super intrinsically linked together. Yeah, it's kind of a brain wrap. Makes it easier to change things though. Anyway, let me know if you enjoyed this sort of video. If you don't, that's fine. I'll probably make more anyway, and then you just don't have to watch them or whatever. Yeah.